5 weeks after Hamas launched a surprise terror attack on Israel, Iran's other proxies are maintaining near daily small-scale attacks on Israel and U.S. regional forces. An Israel-based analyst tells us why he thinks those attacks are remaining at a low level.
Iran and its various franchises and proxies, to some degree, have been playing catch-up with this and aren't quite clear yet as to exactly what they want.
An Iranian American activist gives us an update on U.S. congressional legislation that would tighten sanctions against Iran's Islamist rulers, and the Baha'i international community tells us what is behind a surge in arrests of Iran's minority Baha'is.
Whenever the state of human rights in Iran generally has deteriorated, that also means that the situation of the Baha'is has also deteriorated.
From the Voice of America, this is Flashpoint Iran. Good morning, I'm Michael Lippin in Washington. Hezbollah and its allies in southern Lebanon have carried out more strikes on Israel in recent days, killing an Israeli civilian and wounding several soldiers, and prompting retaliatory strikes by Israel. Iran-backed forces have been attacking northern Israel from southern Lebanon on a daily basis since October 8th in support of Hamas's war on Israel from Gaza. The attacks to the north have gradually increased in intensity and the casualties they cause, prompting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to warn on Monday that those who think they can expand attacks against Israeli troops and civilians are playing with fire. In a speech on Saturday, Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah called for dragging out the war for as long as possible to enable what he described as greater resistance against Israel. Jonathan Spire is a research director at the Middle East Forum. I asked him by phone Tuesday why Iranian proxies like Hezbollah want to drag out the conflict.
My general sense is, first of all, we're not with clear knowledge yet as to how much Iran knew about October 7th in advance. It's not that we should close the door on the possibility that there was Iranian prior knowledge, but we don't yet have a clear verification of that. So it's possible that the Iranians, to some degree, did not plan October 7th, were not involved in it tactically, which means that they were possibly taken by surprise by it too. My sense is, if we look at the statements made by Iranian proxies since then, that there has been a certain amount of catching up to do. If we think about Nasrallah's last couple of speeches, he has said, first of all, from his point of view at least, that October 7th was a purely Palestinian operation, and secondly, that Hezbollah is involved already at a certain level. So taken from that kind of statement, what I would say is that Iran and its various franchises and proxies, to some degree, have been playing catch up with this and aren't quite clear yet as to exactly what they want. On the one hand, they don't want Hamas, their ally and proxy, to fall and to be destroyed. On the other hand, they don't necessarily want to be entering into a full-scale war against Israel, and perhaps even the US too. So they're kind of walking the tightrope, walking the high wire between those two contradictory options. That's my sense.
Why is it your view that Iran and its proxies wouldn't want Hamas to be totally destroyed?
Well, at the end of the day, Hamas is a significant asset and proxy for the Iranians. The Hamas-led enclave in Gaza can be used as a tool of pressure, after all, against Israel. Iran is engaged in a strategy of trying to surround Israel with militia proxies and clients. If we think about Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Shia militias or Iran-associated militias already now on the ground in Syria, Islamic Jihad and Hamas in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip and the Hamas de facto authority in the Gaza Strip constitutes a component of that strategy in which the Iranians have invested quite heavily all the way back now to the 1990s. So the last thing they want is to see their investment come to nothing by that entity being destroyed and replaced by some other power structure. So it's a question of that's a proxy, not necessarily the most powerful or important proxy to Iran, but a proxy, an ally and client nevertheless, and they wish to see their client preserved.
And why do you think Iran and its main proxy in the region, Hezbollah, are not inclined to get fully involved at this point?
Yeah, this is the contradiction, or this is the complexity. At the end of the day, Lebanese Hezbollah is a very large, as you mentioned, franchise of Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. It is the de facto ruling power in Lebanon today. The Iranians have invested in it enormously. There is now famously 150,000 rockets and missiles, we're told, pointing at Israel. They don't want all of that to go up in smoke. That is there primarily as a strategic asset to deter an Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear facilities, or if such an attack is carried out, to be used as a weapon of war against Israel. So they don't want to use that prematurely. They don't want to enter into a situation of war with Israel, whereby Israel will then respond very powerfully against Hezbollah in Lebanon and possibly destroy it or set it back many years at a time when that strategic issue of the nuclear facilities, has not come onto the agenda. So I think that's the key point. Hezbollah is there for a reason from the Iranian point of view, and the reason is not to protect Hamas, even though the Iranians would like Hamas, nevertheless, to survive. So they operate within that dilemma, I would say.
It also appears that Israel and the U.S. have a dilemma on their hands because both have been attacked by Iran's proxies to the north.
Yes.
Why do you think it is that both Israel and the U.S. are deterred somewhat from responding more harshly to those attacks?
Well, I think we have to a little bit differentiate between the Israeli calculus and that of the U.S. Administration. Israel is currently involved in a war on one front with a very clear goal, the goal being the destruction of the Hamas Authority in Gaza. Israel wants to complete that goal, and Israel does not, therefore, wish to enter into a war on two fronts. Your question is very much in place, because if we think about the volume of Hezbollah attacks in the north, were it not for the fact that Israel is currently engaged in a war in the south, these attacks would undoubtedly have provoked an Israeli response, which would have precipitated war. So currently with Israel, it's very clear. Israel is engaged in a war in the south. It doesn't want a war in the north. So it's holding Hezbollah back at the moment, responding to Hezbollah attacks, but not punishing Hezbollah, so to speak, for its aggression. And that stance will continue for just as long as the war in the south continues. And it is very possible that once the war in the south is completed, and hopefully from an Israeli point of view, completed with victory, Israel will then turn to the north and punish Hezbollah severely for the aggressions of recent days. I think with the U.S. administration, the consideration is somewhat different. The U.S. administration has pursued a somewhat policy of détente, or an attempted policy of détente towards the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Biden administration doesn't want confrontation with Iran. It wants to avoid confrontation with Iran. We should not assume that the Hamas attack in Gaza has ended that policy of Biden administration. The Biden administration is hoping to end the war in Gaza and then go back to that policy, I think, of inducement with the Iranians. As a result of that, frankly, the Biden administration is doing its best to ignore as best it can or respond in a very minor way to the quite heinous, I think, series of ongoing attacks. There was one just a few minutes ago on the Conoco gas field with a US base literally 15, 20 minutes ago. Daily attacks taking place with a very limited response by the US.
So just to wrap up here, how do you see this conflict developing in the coming days and weeks?
Well, I would say we should not rule out the possibility of the further heating up of the northern front, the front between Israel and Hezbollah. Because if Israel continues in the direction it wishes to go in Gaza, and the Israeli forces are making progress in Gaza, and Hamas forces are weakening, and Israel wishes to destroy the Hamas Authority in Gaza, that's its stated goal, to bring down the Hamas government in Gaza. If they get close to that goal, or as they get closer to that goal, it becomes more and more difficult for Lebanese Hezbollah and the other Iranian assets in the neighborhood not to react, because if Hamas is destroyed by Israel, the Hamas government in Gaza, and Lebanese Hezbollah and others are seen to have done nothing to try to preserve it, that will very significantly weaken their standing in the region and their ability to project power and strength and aggression as they wish to do. So it means the more successful Israel is in Gaza, the more likely it becomes that a front will be opened up in the north. There is gradually escalating aggression in the north from Hezbollah day by day, increasing range of attacks, increasing attacks on civilians. And I think that, there is a very real possibility of deterioration to a two-front war, and we should not in any way underestimate that possibility.
Well, Jonathan Spire, Director of Research at the Middle East Forum, on the line from Tel Aviv, thank you very much for joining us on Flashpoint Iran.
Thanks, Michael.
Here in Washington on Tuesday, tens of thousands of people gathered for a pro-Israel rally on the National Mall to show solidarity with the Jewish state as it fights Iran's proxies on multiple fronts. One of the organizers, the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, estimated the crowd size at 290,000 people. Jewish news outlets called it the largest pro-Israel gathering in U.S. history. I went to the rally and found a number of Iranians showing their support for Israel. One of them was an Iranian Jewish resident of Washington named Sina. I asked him what message the rally is sending.
People of Israel really are looking for peace and are not at all seekers of war. And I really think that the people should know that Israel does not seek to be at war with anyone, much like the Iranian people who are pro-Israel, pro what Israel does in terms of human rights, in terms of democracy, in terms of peace-loving, freedom-loving nation.
I also found an Iranian woman holding a placard showing Iran's pre-Islamic Revolution flag and Israel's flag together. Here's what she told me.
I'm from Iran. My name is Ariana, and I moved to the United States about 8 years ago.
From Iran?
From Iran itself, yeah.
And what is your religious background, if I may ask?
Like most Iranians, I was born in a Shia Muslim family.
So, Ariana, can you share why you came to this rally today?
I came to show support to our Jewish friends because their suffering is our suffering. We have been in hostage for the last 44 years with an evil and criminal government which only invests the Iranian money to promote terrorism in the region and supporting Hezbollah, Hamas, investing in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon.
What is your feeling about how the Iranian diaspora, how your friends, your family are reacting to this war and feeling about this war?
I think we are a diaspora because of our current government, so of course we are feeling bad for anyone who died, regardless of where they were born, which kind of family and which kind of religious background. But we know that our government is the one promoting and funding this war and how it started. They were trained by Iranians, they were funded by Iranians, and they were given weapons by Iran government.
Another group of Iranians holding a pre-Islamic Revolution flag caught my attention, so I spoke to one of them as well.
My name is Megdad. I'm from Iran. I live in Florida.
Where in Iran are you from?
My parents are from Abadan, but I was born in Shiraz.
Tell us, why are you here today as an Iranian who is not Jewish? Because there are some Jewish Iranians here also.
I'm here to support the State of Israel. I believe that's the only democracy in the Middle East. I'm here to support them and support their fight against the Islamic fanatics.
What kind of reaction have you had from other members of this crowd when they see you waving this pre-revolutionary flag?
This is the Iranian flag forever, and it's been for thousands of years. Very welcoming, appreciative, everybody very nice. They even give me some sweets and water and all that. So holding the flag and holding my sign, which says the King Reza Pahlavi for Middle East peace.
So what do you think about other Iranian Muslims in the diaspora who have kind of mixed feelings about this war? They don't like what Hamas did, but they also don't like what Israel is doing. Some feel that Israel is killing too many innocent people, for example. What is your feeling about that?
Iranians are Iranians, no matter their ethnic or their religion, where they come from. Iranians are Iranians, and I think that they are supporting Israel in a fight with Islamic fanatics.
The Iranian American community also has been making its voice heard in the U.S. legislative process. After months of advocacy by Iranian American activists, the House of Representatives passed a bill in September called the Mahsa Act. It is named after Iranian Kurdish woman Mahsa Amini, who died last year while in the custody of Iran's morality police after they arrested her for allegedly not wearing her hijab in accordance with Islamist dress codes. Her death sparked Iran's biggest mass protests to date against its Islamist rulers. One of the main goals of the Masa Act is to codify U.S. sanctions against those rulers into law, rather than rely on a U.S. president to impose sanctions by executive order. I asked one of the campaigners for the legislation, Sarah Raviani, why she believes executive orders are not enough.
Executive orders are not enough because they can be removed. And we saw that during the beginning of the Biden administration when there was a desire to return to the JCPOA. There was talk of removing the sanctions on the supreme leader and the president of Iran. So these legislative sanctions are different because they would not allow an administration to remove these sanctions without congressional approval. So that's what makes the Masa Act different, and that's why it's important to our activists. And it also seeks to sanction the president and supreme leader of Iran for human rights abuses and support for terrorism specifically, which is a new component.
Where does the Masa Act stand today? And what can you share with our audience in terms of updates on your campaign?
The Masa Act has passed the House of Representatives and currently stands in the Senate. It has 7 co-sponsors for the Senate companion bill S-2626, 3 Republicans and 4 Democrats who have signed on to co-sponsor this legislation. And now we are waiting to see a markup in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee by Senator Cardin.
What is your expectation for when we'll see further action on this?
I hope soon as possible, in light of the recent terrorist attack in Israel and the ongoing human rights abuses in Iran. We've seen 600 executions so far this year. I would say that this piece of legislation should be high priority. So I would hope to see as soon as possible a markup in the Senate and to see it progress just like it did in the House.
That was Iranian American activist Sarah Raviani. We'll have more of my conversation with Raviani in next week's program. You're listening to VOA's Flashpoint Iran. I'm Michael Lippin. The Baha'i international community says Iranian authorities arrested 19 members of Iran's Baha'i minority in a series of home raids in the cities of Karaj and Hamadan last week. The organization said many of the Baha'is were verbally abused and physically assaulted during the raids, which it said were confirmed by Iranian state media. I spoke by phone with Baha'i International Community Representative Simin Fahandej and asked how her organization was able to obtain information about the arrests.
It's actually quite difficult to obtain information from a country where the individuals who are living there are persecuted heavily. I mean, there are individuals who have actually received long sentences for speaking to the media, for spreading news or sharing news on their social media. So there's a lot of fear and intimidation that is spread by the Iranian government in order to essentially prevent people from sharing and disseminating this type of news. So it is very, very difficult to obtain the information. But the information that we do put out is accurate and is based on the information that we receive.
How do the arrests of the 19 Baha'is last week compare to what you've seen in terms of Iran's arrests of Baha'is in the first 10 months of this year?
Yes, what we've observed is that whenever the state of human rights in Iran generally has deteriorated, that also means that the situation of the Baha'is has also deteriorated, unfortunately. And we've seen that in the past few months, there has been an escalation in the persecution of the Baha'is. Just the past couple of months alone, we've had over 200 incidents of persecution. There's, of course, these 19 arrests and 20 home raids that happened just a few days ago. But just a couple of weeks ago, we also had dozens of arrests in the cities of Shiraz in Yazd and Isfahan, and the arrests that happened in the past few days were in the cities of Hamadan and Karaj. So we see that actually there's been this increase in the persecution of the Baha'is across the country. And one other pattern that we have noticed is that many of the individuals that have been arrested have actually been women. Just a couple of weeks ago, 10 Baha'is were arrested in Isfahan, and all of them were women, and most of them were actually young women. And in the new wave of arrests, and also the ones a couple of weeks ago, there have been 4 or 5 elderly women whose husbands had actually been executed by the Iranian government in the 1980s. So we see that really this pattern of persecution against the Baha'is essentially affects Baha'is from the moment they are born until even into their advanced age, and even after death. We see that Baha'i cemeteries are destroyed, and Baha'is are not permitted to even sometimes visit the resting place of their loved ones.
Well, the Baha'i international community has been raising awareness of these cases of persecution, as you described, through things like a new report called The Baha'i Question that was published last month. You also have a new social media project called Our Story is One. Can you tell us about these latest projects of your organization and what kind of response you've seen to them?
Yeah, so the Baha'i Question publication is actually a publication that started a few decades back, and the name of it comes from a memorandum, a policy document of the Iranian government itself, which is actually called the Baha'i Question document. This is a memorandum from the Iranian government that was actually stamped confidential and that was found and brought to light by UN Special Rapporteur in 1993. And it's signed and approved by the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei himself. And in this document, it essentially states that Baha'is should be treated, and I quote, in a way that their progress and development be blocked. And it states a number of provisions by which to do this, which includes expulsion of Baha'i students from universities, from schools, from places of employment, if they're Baha'is, and also to place Baha'is children in schools with a strong religious ideology in order to distance them from their faith. And these provisions are all stated in this document. And so taking this Baha'i Question name, the Baha'i international community started these publications called the Baha'i Question, in which it details the persecution of the Baha'is in Iran since the revolution in 1979 up to now, patterns of persecution, also the support for the Baha'is that has really increased over the years. And as you mentioned, one example of this incredible kind of global support that we have seen for the Baha'is is the Our Story is One campaign, which was launched just this past June in honor of 10 Baha'i women who were executed 40 years ago in the month of June in Iran. And so in honor of their anniversary, the Baha'i community launched the Our Story is One campaign, but also dedicated it to all the women in Iran who have suffered in the path of equality and justice and freedom. And through this kind of message, Our Story is One has been able to bring Iranians together to see that the hate speech and the hate propaganda that the Iranian government has really been spreading the past 40 years, trying to create separation between the Baha'i community and the rest of Iranian society, has not worked. That the same persecution that the Baha'i community has experienced these past 40 years has now been extended to all Iranians of all backgrounds, of all faiths, and that regardless of faith, background, and gender, we are all one and our story is one. And we actually saw unprecedented support for the Baha'i community worldwide. We had statements and support from Nobel Peace Laureates, from foreign ministers, high-level dignitaries, government officials, artists, musicians, and countless others. And one feature of the campaign was actually artwork. We made a public call for works of art, music, and dance, and in really celebrating the lives of not just these 10 women, but all Iranian women of all backgrounds and faiths. And we saw a remarkable display of solidarity and support with the Baha'i community through this beautiful artwork and music that we've received.
Well, Simin Fahandej, Baha'i International Community Representative to the United Nations, speaking to us from Geneva, Switzerland. Great to have you back on Flashpoint Iran.